Thank you, Mr. Prasrij, for inviting me to address this gathering today. At a time when our country and also the rest of the world is faced with an unprecedented crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, we all know that the researchers are working round the clock to develop vaccines and treatments for the virus. But that's likely to take some time, even if we are very optimistic. Till such time this is done, social distancing is pretty much the only known means to break the chain of transmission and slow down the spread. To achieve this objective, by way of an unprecedented move, the lockdown. Now, this is a watershed event, and the exercise of this scale has not been done before, and therefore it comes with its own set of problems. Experts in the field have predicted that lockdown would have a monumental impact on the economy of the country and severely affect trade and commerce, as it has disrupted the supply chains, not just in India, but across the globe. The necessary consequence in the immediate fallout of the lockdown are the supply chain disruptions, unintentional and imminent delay in performance, and carrying out the contractual obligations. For all kinds of contracts, whether they are manufacturing or supply agreements, the effect and the spread of COVID-19 is undoubtedly wide-ranging. Due to this ongoing lockdown situation, many establishments and companies have been constrained to shut their businesses. Many have been forced to delay and not fulfill their contractual obligations. So it's natural that the business and companies are now looking for ways and means to mitigate their losses to whatever extent that is possible. And at the same time, they're also taking recourse to the legal measures to limit their exposure. Thus, all of you here representing various sectors of the commerce and industry would naturally be interested to know whether the legal framework is existing that can redress the situation created by the pandemic and the lockdown. As a consequence, we have to refer to a clause that is existing in the contracts executed between the parties, though it's rarely used and in the present circumstances has assumed significant importance. The clause is known as the force majeure clause. We shall also deal with the concept of the frustration of contracts under the Indian contract law. Before we go there, I wanted to stress something which is fundamental and inherent in a contract, which is the obligation of the parties of performance. If you refer to Section 37 of the Indian Contract Act, it deals with the obligations of the parties and stipulates that the parties to a contract must either perform or offer to perform their respective promises unless such performance is dispensed with or excused under the provisions of the contract or any other law. So the point to be noted here is that the contract places a legal obligation for the parties to perform their mutual promises. And this carries on till the time the contract is discharged, terminated. Now, a contract should be performed at the time and place specified and agreed between the parties. And the natural and the course of discharging a contract is to perform it. And once you perform it, you're entitled to have the other party's performance to your benefit. And when a matter relating to the performance reaches the court, always an endeavor is made to enforce the exact performance of the contract, keeping in mind the stipulations provided for in the contract, the obligations the parties have undertaken under the contract. Because this is the only way which can legally bring a contract to its logical end. Yet there are ways where the discharge is brought about by other means. Now this could be by way of also an excuse from non-performance of a contract under the Indian Contract Act or any other law. So while stressing here that the primary duty of the contracting party is to either perform or fulfill its promise, we have to also then examine whether in the current pandemic situation, which has brought about the lockdown, whether the situation or circumstances do exist which can relieve the parties of their obligations under a contract. Now, this is the concept which is assumed utmost significance in the present scenario, and we call it the doctrine of force majeure. Now, the force majeure clause typically excuses one of the parties or both from performance of a contract in some way following the occurrence of certain events. Now, those events are often acts and circumstances which are beyond the control of the party concerned. So the force majeure is something like what we say is a superior force, an act of God, and unforeseen circumstances which obstruct or impede the continuation or lawful existence of a contract between the parties. I did refer to the Black's Law Dictionary on the definition, the legal definition of the force majeure. And what it throws up is this. It defines it as an event or effect that can be neither anticipated nor controlled. An unexpected event that prevents somebody from doing or completing something that he or she has agreed or officially planned to do. The term includes both acts of nature, which are something like floods, tempest or earthquakes, hurricanes, and also the acts of people, which are a riot or a strike or maybe a war. So these unforced circumstances are taken care of by embedding a clause, the force majeure clause, in a contract. Now, this, as a result of invocation of the force majeure, the performance of the contract is not merely suspended by the affected parties, it is expected to continue and perform obligations to the extent not prevented by the event of force majeure. But the party is also under an obligation. While you may resort to a force majeure, it is under an obligation to prove that it has taken all the reasonable steps to avoid or mitigate the event and its effect. So what I'm stressing here is that this is something which is totally subjective, and it would differ from case to case, and it's there, and therefore one would perhaps have to go deep into the specific language of the employed in a contract dealing with a force majeure to come to a correct conclusion that whether the difficulties faced by them would be covered in a situation which is contemplated into the force majeure clause. Now, mind you, force majeure is not defined or explicitly mentioned in an Indian Contract Act, but the contingency is invariably expressed by way of an introduction, as I mentioned, of a clause in the contract. Now, if the most recent decision of the Supreme Court, which I'm sure all the legal minds would have by now gone through, is the decision of the Supreme Court in Energy Watchdog versus CERC, which is reported in 2017-14 SEC 80. Now, here the Supreme Court actually dealt with in great detail the jurisprudence on this subject relating to force majeure clauses. The court has also taken note of its earlier decision in Satyabrata Ghosh versus Mugniram Bangur and Company. And since this is the most significant of the decisions which is available with us right now, I think we can very briefly just take note of the fact situation there. Now, this was a case relating to a power purchase agreement which were executed by Adani Power for supply of power from its project at Mundra. Now, the tariff which was adopted by the Commission was keeping into consideration at that point of time that Indonesia, where from the coal was being imported for the generation of electricity, had subsequently changed its domestic coal distribution policy and increased the export prices of coal. Now, this drastically brought about the change in the price of the coal, and the resultant effect was on the generation of electricity. Now, this was change in the policy was claimed by Adani Power to be a force majeure event. and it sought to plead that it should be discharged of its obligations to perform the contract and to restore the economic benefit under the agreement. Now, but at this stage, I would also like to stress that we have to be mindful that those PPAs did contain force majeure clause. In fact, the said clause also was so exhaustive that it contained the exclusion to the force majeure provision. So the Supreme Court, while considering the gamut and the facts of the case and the case law, including certain English case law, has concluded that the escalation of prices of resources which were required for the performance of the contract does not render the contract itself impossible to perform. And this change in circumstances was a risk the parties willingly took while submitting their bids. So essentially, what I see in this judgment is that the court has reinforced the principle that the doctrine of frustration must be applied within narrow limits, and the contracts cannot be frustrated merely because the circumstances in which it was made have been altered. This you can find specifically in para 38 and 39 of the judgment. It has also observed that insofar as the force majeure event is relatable to an express or implied clause in the contract, then we have to be governed by the Chapter 3 of the Contract Act, which deals with the contingent contract, and more particularly the specific section which we know as 32. But insofar as the force majeure event deholds the contract, then we would be dealing with a rule of positive law under Section 56 of the Contract Act. Now, here is interestingly in para 47 of the judgment, an interesting argument was raised by the counsel appearing for Adani Power, which was again rejected, where the court reinforced that in case the particular situation is indeed covered by the force majeure clause, and the court didn't find favor with the party, there was no way that the court would allow a party to then resort to Section 56. So in sum and substance, you will have contract with a force majeure clause, and you may have a situation that you do not have a force majeure clause. Now, in the event you have a force majeure clause, then we will have to, as observed by the Supreme Court, refer to Section 32 to see whether there is a possibility of the unforeseen event being such that it has rendered the performance of the contract impossible, say for a limited time, which provides a window for resuming the normal contractual obligations. But one must not forget that the courts always interpret force majeure clauses narrowly and may not accept any particular event as triggering of a force majeure clause unless that falls within the ambit of the clause which is enshrined in the agreement. Now, in a situation where the contract is without a force majeure clause, there the concept of a frustration of the contract or the doctrine of frustration can be looked into, which is stipulated in Section 56 of the Contract Act. Now, again, here in order to claim that a contract is frustrated, it must be remembered that it is imperative to show that the performance of the contract is entirely impossible, that it has become so fundamentally different that the arrangement and the agreement contemplated at the time of when the parties actually entered into a contract do not survive anymore. In this context, now we have to perhaps look into whether COVID-19 has changed the circumstances completely and totally and fundamentally, so that the entire foundation of the contract between the parties has been rendered impossible to perform. To deal with such situations, so one must remember that the language which has been used in Satyabrata Ghosh's case, which I just mentioned a while ago, that the courts have no general power to absolve a party from the performance of this part of the contract, merely because its performance has become onerous or on account of unforeseen turn of events. So the takeaway is that for both frustration as well as the express force majeure clause, I feel a careful assessment of the contractual provisions is required to be done. This is perhaps the time for all the legal minds and for all the corporates to revisit your existing contracts, take legal advice to explore the remedy that is best possible, and best suitable for you. I am conscious of the fact, and having dealt with commercial contracts as a judge, there are several other clauses often provided in the contract which attempt to deal with situations which are unforeseen, which are typically the price adjustment clauses or clauses which adversely deal with exclusions, or they limit with or deal with the liability for non-performance, or limit the liability in such situations. So the ramifications of a non-performance under a contract, and what are the liquidated damages provided for such a situation, and what is the amount of compensation which has been, whether it's been agreed to be predetermined under a contract, are all provisions which would require to be examined or to deal with the present situation which has arisen because of the COVID-19. As a general principle, a party, remember, assumes the risk of a situation in its own subjectively, whether it's to perform its contractual obligations or whether the contract envisions otherwise. So the objective assessment is often applied by the court to see whether the performance which is sought to be excused is impossible or impractical. Whether this performance is beyond a party's subjective capacity is, however, irrelevant in this analysis. So now if you were to look into the present situation, then whether COVID-19 is a situation which would attract a situation where a party could press into Section 56 to say that the contract is now impractical and impossible to perform. I personally feel that the situation here is as novel as the coronavirus. This crisis is bound to change the world of commerce and industry completely. While it may be true that we have faced adverse situations earlier, and indeed our country has faced wars, famine, and earthquakes on a large scale, but what we are witnessing here is entirely different. It is so fundamentally different that the impact of the breakdown of the system in the commerce under the present calamity is something which is completely unprecedented. We would have no comparison at all with the earlier periods of recession. The industry and commerce, I am very confident, will bounce back. But the work ahead is daunting for all of us. And the area of law here would also evolve. I feel that the jurisprudence on this issue will evolve. The judicial precedents, which I've just mentioned, in which you can do your own research, you will find they're all completely inadequate when we apply the same to the present situation. We may have a clarity on law, but we must remember that given the present situation, there is bound to be huge deliberations and arguments in courts of law across the world. And possibly this will advance a new trend in thinking. The courts presented with the present fact situation is bound to adopt a progressive and proactive thinking, because this is something which was never discussed, it was unheard of. We do not have a judicial precedent, I would say, of such magnitude, of which takes care of deals with a situation of such magnitude. This is clearly evident from the fact that the government and the courts have, on their own suo motu, introduced various measures in order to address the anxiety of the general public. The Supreme Court took the suo motu cognizance of the situation arising out of the challenges faced and faced by the litigants across the country. And it has dealt with the period of limitation to obviate all concerns that we may have. And irrespective of the period of limitation which is prescribed under the general law or the special law, the courts have clarified that this will not come in the way and the limitation period will stand extended. Likewise, if you see that Government of India has also in several situations issued several announcements which to deal with the present situation. And they are issued each and every moment as we go further. The Ministry of Finance and Reserve Bank of India has issued notice whereby the threshold for initiating insolvency proceedings against a corporate debtor has been revised. And recently, I think Allahabad High Court has issued an order whereby clarifying that under Section 29 of the arbitration, the period could stand extended. Reserve Bank of India has announced permissions to all commercial banks and small and cooperative banks, and asking them to give a moratorium of 3 months on payment of installments in respect of all term loans which are outstanding. The deferment of the payment of interest has also been provided for. So, and even for the mandatory compliances provisions are all being addressed. The government is also conscious of the fact that there are travel restrictions. The Ministry of External Affairs has issued various notifications specifying the restrictions implemented for travel, and there are many others. So all these measures do indicate that this is something which is totally novel and new. With the clarity of law we may have in place, the situation calls for a totally extraordinary approach, which will have to be looked into whenever a situation would arise before courts. Although it does appear that COVID-19 does meet the requirement to trigger the force majeure clause, especially taking into consideration all the announcements which I've just mentioned. The scope and the extent of the force majeure in the event of pandemic has to be still assessed on the basis of how the clause is formulated between the parties, and on the basis of the jurisprudence which is pertaining to the extraordinary events in the circumstances which are beyond the control of the parties. So I would say that given the nature of the contracts, one would have to now wait and see as to how the jurisprudence evolves. But the word of caution here is only this, that while this will evolve, there cannot be a blanket exclusion of performance read into contracts during the period of lockdown 19. So we may not imagine this to be a situation that it is all encompassing event applicable to all situations. Keeping that in mind, this is all very interesting time. I'm sure the legal minds are working over this, and whenever such a situation would arise, you all would be ready to meet the challenge. And with this, I wish you all the very best. Stay safe, stay healthy, and maintain social distancing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Judge Saab. I have some good news for you. I think almost everybody has heard you, and I'm just going to ask everybody to raise their thumbs if they did hear you.
Absolutely, I think.
Okay.
It was quite clear and very clearly audible, no issue.
So, Mr. Agarwal, apart from you, I'm just looking at everybody else who's not one of the administrators to see how they reacted. I can see Kalyan, I can see Mr. Nichols in the Netherlands. I can see, yes, did you hear us clearly, Mr. Nichols, in the Netherlands? I can't hear you right now, but if you can just raise your thumb, that would be good. Thank you. So if we can reach the Netherlands, maybe we've had a good connection.
We've traveled a good distance here.
We've traveled a good distance. Judge Saab, I have, the good news is that we still have 500 people on this chat, on this room, and you have kept them rapt and spellbound. What you've said has been very important. They would not log off, and there's still people in the waiting room. So from that point of view, would you mind staying on for a few minutes more? and we will ask you a few questions a little later before you log off. I'm going to trouble you to hear me a little bit because I'm going to say a little bit about force majeure and react to what you said.
Yes.
And then we have another speaker, Abhijit, who is also on. And I think we've got, everybody able to hear now clearly. As soon as the chat numbers go, once we start speaking, then the numbers will drop and then we can have the judge back on. So that's the good news. So firstly, you people have, some of you don't recognize me because I've got a new face. It's called the lockdown face. And some other people I've noticed have grown different types of faces. All right, so just coming back to the law, I don't know how many of you, if you can again show me your thumbs, did you see my share screen? I showed you the sections the judge was referring to. I showed you the Indian Contract Act section 32 when I shared the screen. Did you all see it? It worked, okay, good. So that is a PowerPoint in which we've got the sections. I'm going to share that with you again, just for a quick explanation of what's going on and what the judge talked about so wonderfully. If you see, you've got section 32 on your screen right now. This is enforced when a contract has a provision. So in a contract where there is a provision for force majeure, you'd use section 32, and it's called a contingent contract for the reason that that clause becomes triggered, okay? Now, then Justice Narula talked about section 56. When you don't have a clause, then you look at section 56, because section 56 says, if I can't do whatever I've contracted to do, then it's not possible for the law to enforce it. So that becomes an impossibility. Now, a couple of principles I wanted to share with you, and you will also want the citation of this famous case. The first one in 1954 is Satyabrata Ghosh. You can see it on my screen, versus Mugniram Bangur. Have you got that? 1954 SCR 310. And here they explored the question of section 56, and it was a landmark case, but it followed from some British cases, and the big one was Taylor versus Wessing, which you will find. Then our latest judgment, which the judge referred to from the Supreme Court, is Justices P.C. Ghosh and R.F. Nariman in Energy Watchdog. Raise your thumbs if you can see it on the screen. Can you all see it on the screen? Dr. Jatinder, you're my test case, so you can just raise your thumb.
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, good. So this is the operative part of that judgment. So it says that if frustration is to take place, dehaul's the contract, it's governed by section 56. So these are the two things. And now what is the effect of force majeure for us practically? One of the primary effects is that the obligation becomes postponed. And Justice Narula mentioned that too. You must understand what that means. That means you're not discharged by force majeure or frustration. You are just subject to do that thing which you are doing today. You can't do it today, you do it later on. That's the effect, and those are some of the judgments relating to force majeure, which you can see on your screen. There's Alopi Prasad going back to the 60s, and I have to thank my colleague Pankuri for having put this together. Now, I'd like to just mention to you 2-3 points more, and then I think we are running short of time also, so we won't take too much, and we want some tests also to be considered. I'm going to say that you should consider what happens to your clients in certain circumstances where we have insurance and health insurance contracts, where you have contracts that are day-to-day, like tenancy agreements or landlords agreements. And please understand that those are also subject to force majeure. If a mall has been locked up and is not going to be operable at all, then the question and the doctrine of force majeure is almost impossible to avoid. And I'm told by the industry that in many cases, the doctrine of force majeure is accepted now, even by owners of property where the shop, the mall, or whatever has been locked down. So that is something that will be hitting the courts in a big way. We will ask some reasonable questions to Justice Narula, which is, one of them would be also to do with the policy, whether we're going to do it on a case-to-case basis and look at it subjectively by all means, but subjectively on an equitable basis or subjectively on a commercial basis. That's my question. I'll be asking the judge in a few minutes. And then I think you have to also understand the effect of force majeure on commercial contracts is one where you don't generally interfere with a money payment obligation. So that's something I want to say very expressly to you all, that if you think that your money payment obligation has been held up, please think again. Force majeure does not interfere with money. Force majeure comes in where the obligation is something physical, something you have to do and could not do. The assumption is you can somehow manage to get to your bank and make your payment. You may not make it today, you might make it after a few days, but the obligation can never go away. And that hits health insurance, which is essentially a payment obligation. It hits all forms of insurance because an insurance company cannot effectively be discharged by force majeure because that's what they were meant to do. They have a money payment obligation. So too bad if it hurts you, if your back business doesn't work, but if you have a money payment obligation, force majeure doesn't come in. What happens is in contracts like employment, there are arguments that there is no delivery, therefore there is no payment. That's a real dispute, and that's arguable on some, depending on the type of contract, whether it's hit by the recent COVID orders, whether the government of India's order forbidding you from discharging workers applies to management, applies to consultants, and so on and so forth. So there are interesting issues that will come up and must be considered from time to time about the effect of force majeure on different types of contracts. So the judge was very unequivocal when he said that we have to, there's no one size fits all. There is no one size fits all because these cases that are going to hit the courts, and our courts, of course, have unlimited unlimited time. They are not at all busy. I don't know how they're going to handle this tidal wave of cases that is going to come in as soon as the lockdowns are over. But we're going to have that hit the courts very, very soon. And the effect of the force majeure will then become quite known. Justice Narula, as I expected, as soon as I started speaking, without a High Court judge speaking, the numbers have dropped. We are at 460.
You are hugely popular, I'm sure.
Not as popular as the judge. So if you can please log on now, we'll have the privilege of seeing you as our judge on the screen.
Can I make an attempt?
Yes, I think you can get on now. We're down to 468. Are you there, Dr. Jatinder? Can you get him on?
Yeah, that's fine.
So have you found the judge?
Yes,
I think he's logged on.
Meanwhile, I'll ask the IT admin to
Yeah, he's
unlock it.
on now.
So we can have the next speaker right now, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to introduce my colleague from the bar, Abhijit Joshi from Mumbai, as our next speaker. Abhijit is extremely gifted and has done so many interesting things. I don't know where to begin. He's founding partner of the country's leading corporate law firm in Mumbai. He has 25 years of practice. And if you look at his face, he doesn't look like he's got 25 years of practice. He looks much younger. He is uniquely positioned for a broad range of clients and organizations, and he's been recognized in India's top 100 lawyers by India Business Law Journal. He does corporate M&A and is also recognized by Chambers. He's handled many of the world of the interesting Mumbai matters that you can imagine. Commercial matters come to Mumbai in very high volume. So thank you so much. Judge Saab, good afternoon and welcome aboard. We are so happy to see you.
Same here.
There we are, finally. Would you like to say something to the whole group before we move to Abhijit Joshi, who's also a speaker? Just give us a minute.
Yes, Mr. Biswit. So basically, what you really reinforce is what I said, that you would have to keep in mind that this is not a situation which we had contemplated, and it should not be considered to be an overarching provision to be applied across the board, as you mentioned. And you have raised some interesting, made some interesting observations related to different contracts. And I'm sure all such questions are going to eventually come before the courts. And it's going to be an interesting time to watch.
Thank you, Judge Saab. Thank you. Thank you for staying on. I look forward to hearing Abhijit Joshi join us. Abhijit, can you unmute yourself and speak? And then we will take questions in about, I've tried to keep it short because we want to hear Judge Saab a little bit more on answers to questions from such a wide audience. Thank you, Abhijit.
Yeah, thank you, Amir, and thank you, Justice Nirula. That was actually quite enlightening. We were all wondering because we are flooded with various queries from various sides of the spectrum, some trying to invoke, some trying to avoid. Obviously, there is a deep amount of pain in the industry in this point of time. Cash flows are extremely tight. And I don't want to reiterate issues that already have been discussed in terms of the legality. That is actually pretty clear. In fact, the jurisprudence also seems to be pretty clear on the subject, that the courts should, until now, read down the clauses pretty strictly, especially if there's no clause frustration of contract. But various clauses, various type of contracts. In my experience, I've seen, Justice Nirula cited Adani Power. These are power purchase contracts, long gestation contracts, contracts which run for years together. And force majeure is something which typically finds place in these kind of contracts. But they are shorter term contracts, lease, licenses, commercial contracts, which often do not have force majeure. Some of them have it, some of them don't. So the questions that are coming to us are wide ranging. Contracts which do not have force majeure, contracts which have force majeure but not adequate, contracts, even if they have the force majeure clause, the consequence of the contract or rather the force majeure is provided. It's not termination, it's a mere suspension. There are lots of factual aspects which actually complicate this matter. For example, in rental agreements, when they say I'm unable to perform or I'm unable to use, we see many cases, the offices are shut, but the servers are working, the air conditions are on, they have security guys within the premises, and the tenant says, I'm not going to pay you because I just don't have the money. And therefore, it's very important, especially for our fraternity to give the correct and the most constructive advice. This should not be a ground for festering litigations when actually what one needs to do is to take a pragmatic call, reach out to people, because 50 to 60% of contracts do get in these situations negotiated because you will find reasonability on the other side. As the judge said, it is unprecedented, and even for the landlords, it's not easy to lose a tenant and regain that tenant. If tomorrow there is a cure found for this, word would come back like never before. All of us are at home and dying to get out, and I think you will see a opposite reaction in terms of footfalls and activity elsewhere. So it's a very tricky situation to interpret this from a legal perspective. And I think the operative part, which is the most useful, and I'm glad that our advice has not been completely off, because as Justice Nirula said, courts will have to be proactive and pragmatic in a situation like this, where the world has not seen pandemic. So people born in the 1900s probably have not seen a pandemic, and therefore something as severe as this, as to how the courts will interpret, irrespective of the jurisprudence that is found, is still a question that needs to be explored. We do expect a flood of cases trying to rush, but again, as lawyers, we'll have to take a very constructive proposition out here. I just heard yesterday that a serious effort for mediation is being considered by several chambers in situation like this, so that the courts don't get flooded with these kind of disputes, which are purely contractual and where more urgent matters may suffer. And what we are also finding is that the supply chain of, so we do work for various pharma companies. Some of them do manufacture hydrochloroquine, which is slated to be one of the drugs that could work. And we are seeing supply chains, their supply chains are affected. It's not only a situation of 50% of their employees, despite being essential services, are not able to make it to production facilities. APIs that are being imported from China has not reached their premises. Some are lying at the docks, some are not being shipped, and therefore the capacities are severely impacted. The questions that are arising are on employee side as well. The government seems to have said, please do not sack your employees, please do not cut their pay, which is the correct proposition at this point of time. We must share the burden, especially of the weaker section of the society. But the questions do arise that these are private enterprises. They don't have cash flows. They don't have lines of borrowing. No moratorium of payment of interest has been granted. And should private enterprises be allowed to collapse by intervention by the government, which should have been in their private domain. So several questions are arising at this point of time. Unfortunately, we can guide towards the jurisprudence, and second is towards a logical interpretation of how things would pan out. But it's a lot of crystal gazing at this point of time in terms of providing constructive advice, which is legally sound, because we are in uncharted territory at this point of time. With that, I know, Amir, you are running short of time, so I don't want to take more time to present. We have we are fortunate to have the judge here, and if the judge is answering the query, there ain't no better thing than that. So I will I'll give it back to you, Pasrich, from here, and you can moderate the session.
Thank you so much. I think you spoke very well about the issues that are hitting us and which are extremely topical. Thank you, Abhijit. Sanjay, just before I ask Sanjay to ask a question, because I don't think he's ready for this yet, Sanjay Agarwal, if you want to ask a question from the industry, you keep it very short, because we have you from the industry, and he's our Senior Vice President of the PhD Chamber. In the meanwhile, what I'm going to do is I'm going to also give you a little bit of a blurb about the PhD Chamber, which I head the Law and Justice Committee of the PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It's one of the oldest chambers in the country, actually possibly the oldest, going back to 1905. It was earlier called Punjab, Haryana and Delhi Chamber. And we pick up on issues like this And the Law and Justice Committee is something which you might want to participate in. And if so, please log on to the website, join the chamber and see what we can do. Second thing I want to make, which is a housekeeping announcement, is we'll put this PowerPoint and the case law and the paper onto the PhD Chamber website so that you can access it. Many people have been asking for the cases. They've been asking for the website. You can also find it at ilaindia.com. So you've got two places where you can find it. You can also find it on LinkedIn, and we'll put the paper and the PowerPoint on for you. Now, if I may come to the judge, Judge Saab, my first question, and then I'll ask Mr. Sanjay Agarwal to ask a question, is what's the policy going to be? Are we going to look at equity and fair play, or are we going to look at commercial contracts the way they are looked at in the West, which is largely a system of justice that says, well, if it's provided for, howsoever inconvenient, the chips will go in that direction? Or is there going to be a sort of policy decision around there where we'll balance, like we often try to do, particularly the judges of the 60s and 70s of the Supreme Court, who treated procedure as a not so important. Similarly, rights were balanced rather than assigned by contractual provisions. Now, if you have a really nasty clause in a health insurance, or you have an exclusion which is utterly unfair, would the courts tend to apply the law, or would you prefer to treat it as something where there's sort of substantive justice to be performed, and almost like the suo motu operation of the Supreme Court under Article 142? High courts, fortunately, don't have that jurisdiction, so they are more predictable. Where are we going with that? Thank you. That's my question.
So, Mr. Pastreich, the way I see it, the cases are always decided on the basis of the facts presented before the courts. As I mentioned very briefly, that the fact situations and all the precedents that are available with us was entirely different. I would not like to add to the confusion which is already prevailing, but just would like to remark that what we are going to witness in courts has never been tested before. This is going to be a new field for you lawyers, and the judges, I'm sure, will also have a different viewpoint. This I say because I see law is always evolving, and if you read all these cases, they have always been decided in the fact situation. During the time of emergency, we had a different case law which was brought about, and it is possible, I do not deny, that the courts would perhaps also look into the question of equity, but as you rightly mentioned, that's perhaps going to be a domain where the Supreme Court can lead the way. And so therefore, it is all wait and watch for me right now. But I'm confident about one part, that all lawyers are going to be extremely busy. When this is over, all of you are going to be flooded with a lot of work, and consequently, we'll also have to get up to meet the challenge.
It is a big challenge. Thank you. Could I ask Mr. Agarwal, Sanjay Agarwal, our Senior Vice President, to ask a question from the judge from the industry?
Yes, good evening, Justice Narula. As you very rightly said, a lot of new lines have to be drawn. Many things have to be probably be tackled for the first time in view of this unprecedented situation. But our feeling from the industry side is that we already have a system in which, by its very design, anything that ends up in courts gets delayed. Now, my concern would be, can we have an abbreviated system in view of the unprecedented nature of this event which has happened, and the sort of huge tidal wave of disputes and force majeure claims and counterclaims would come in? Could there be a possibility of some abbreviated procedure in which, on the basis of, yes, on the basis of equity or in the basis of the extant law, but at least, the things are sorted out as fast as possible so that the economy gets on with
See,
its
on
job.
this issue, my knowledge is on the basis of what I've been reading. And there has been discussion all over that the governments could perhaps come up with legislations. But that's all something which is totally in the air right now, where there's no clarity. There is one possibility that the government could come up with some legislations that will have to be examined if that happens. But yes, if the courts can take a different approach on such matters, there could be a possibility on that aspect as well. Mr. Pastrich did mention about the mediation being one such approach, that the courts are not flooded and the matters get resolved in the mediation center. So which is fairly robust system, which is already in place and fairly successful. So there is a great deal of possibility that such matters can be sorted out in a truncated way. But lot needs to be worked out. The final details have to be worked out, both with the courts and with at the government level, before this can really be fructified in a solution which can be put into service.
So coming to the point of mediation mentioned by you, Justice Narula, I have one additional question. I am sorry to be hogging the time, but the point is, what would ensure that the government is, which is a huge litigant in most cases, government actually acts genuinely in the mediation process so that the thing doesn't go to the courts, because mediation is a process in which typically a bureaucrat tries to shy away.
No, sorry, what's your question? I couldn't gather that. How do we?
The question is that in mediation, could there be some proactive method to encourage government or PSU, matters to be also actively, sorted out at mediation
So,
level?
Mr. Agarwal, just remember that mediation is a voluntary process. But I can only say this much, that the positive trends are visible when the government has announced certain schemes dealing with the settlement of both direct and indirect cases. Being part of the tax bench, we are conscious of the fact that many such matters are indeed getting settled. And so there is a positive outlook which I can see as far as the government is concerned, but it's for the government to address this issue. I'm not really in a position to say that how the government will react to this one.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. I just want to add something there. It's with the government contracts, I think Justice Narula has been on both sides of the bench. He's argued for settlements. He's argued and pushed people towards it. A lot depends now on the benches and how much they'll have the power to push settlements. With the government, there's a morass because the people behind don't let them do it. If a policy comes out from the government, that would be very nice. And I think the PhD chamber can do something positive there. We can issue a memo or a white paper to the government saying that if we're going to help this process, then mediation has to be.
Mr. Pastrich, you'll have to be a part of that. I think we'll do something, and I think you'll have to be the main person drafting it, and we'll make sure that we get heard there.
Yes.
In the
So
in
we can put a paper to the government saying that this is one of the needs of the hour, because you have to have a government policy on mediation which at least gets rid of the chaff. The deep disputes that cannot be decided should not be wasted into mediation because it just doesn't reach anywhere. But the easy cases, and many of them can be done on parameters that are identified, especially tax, those should not clog up the courts, and that would help. I'm very conscious of that. We've talked about doing a whole project on that with the International Bar Association, but it's not yet taken off because we need funding, and then COVID has happened. But that was discussed in January. Now, coming back to the audience, I have someone, as I said, from the Netherlands, Mr. Joachim Nichols van der Veen. Can I unmute you and ask you to ask the question that you raised your hand for?
Yes, I can. I'm unmuted now.
Yes, you are.
You are audible, sir. Please go ahead.
So good afternoon to all, and I'm happy to be invited to participate with a brief intervention from the Dutch law perspective. First of all, I'm very happy, of course, to be in this Zoom meeting and to see so many of you are safe. So first of all, the Netherlands is a civil law country, and under Dutch law, the parties can generally claim a specific performance. Whether the force majeure sets that aside or not will largely depend on the interpretation of the contract and the circumstances of the particular case. So like Mr. Pasriet said, also in the Netherlands, there's no one size fits all. Many contracts and even general conditions that are applied in many fields of industry contain specific clauses. So if there's a specific clause, you should look there. But in general, a force majeure event relieves the debtor from the duty of the specific performance, as well as of the duty to pay damages. However, an important maybe difference, if I heard it correctly, for the Dutch law is that the creditor may still terminate or alter the contract in an event of force majeure. So what happens? The specific performance may be hit by a definitive or temporary impossibility to perform. And impossible might be perhaps if governmental measures preclude performance. An economic inability to pay does not by itself qualify as an impossibility under Dutch contract law, as I think we heard is the situation under the laws of India. So if you cannot pay, if your cash flow doesn't allow it, or you just don't have the money, this doesn't discharge you from your obligations. So in general, a force majeure clause needs to be interpreted narrowly. Maybe the debtor has other options to perform, and these need to be explored. And even if they may be more onerous, there is a margin. As long as they are not too disproportionate, the obliger should stretch his leg and still come with the performance. So if you cannot get a certain article or a certain good from your supplier because they're in an area that is locked in, you should go and seek another supplier in an area maybe that's not locked down. So does the COVID-19 lead to an impossibility to perform? It's up to the obliger, of course, to explain in sufficient detail that this is the case. And if it comes to court, he needs to prove it. It's worth noting, maybe, that the China Council for Promotion of International Trade has issued force majeure certificates to Chinese businesses affected by a close down in earlier months in China. So that might be still an idea in order to make the evidence and the proof of the force majeure more easy. But still, this is the totally unprecedented virus, this pandemic that hit us. So the jurisprudence will need to evolve on that.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Hello?
Yes, maybe I can just make a conclusion on two typical things of maybe Dutch law.
Yes,
We have a different article in the law about unforeseen circumstances. And those are circumstances that are not provided for in the contract. So it's not as if the parties hadn't foreseen it when they drafted the contract. It is that it has not been provided for in the contract. And what is the effect of the unforeseen circumstances? This is that the contract, the consequences of the contract may be altered. This is something you can ask the court to do. And you can ask it your counterparty in negotiations. So that might be a way out. Last remark, there's also under the civil law system in Holland, the principle of reasonableness and fairness. And I heard Mr. Pasriets ask about the courts applying the rule of equity. We do not have the rule of equity as such under Dutch law, but we do have the principle of reasonableness and fairness. And this may either broaden or restrict the obligations of the parties to a contract. So there the justice will have also the possibility to apply a certain rule that they feel might be reasonable, even if the contract doesn't really provide for it. So that's the situation in Holland.
Thank you. So coming back to Abhijit for a second, if you could ask your question from the judge, and then we will close the day. I have so many people asking so many questions here. I am afraid we have to limit it today because we are hitting 1 full hour. We've crossed the time that was allocated, and it's been a very successful session. I'm just going to ask Abhijit to ask one quick question of Justice Narula again, and then we'll wind up for the day. And I'll give a short thanks to everybody who's participated. Thank you.
Sir, the question is that we are seeing a very complex grid of abdication of responsibility emerging in these scenarios. The government is saying we prescribing as to what we private entities should or should not do. The private entities have not been given any help until now, at least. It is not a country with social security. Some of these may be covered by insurances or not covered by insurances. I'm sure there would be dispute on the insurance side as well. Nobody is disputing the fact that the lower strata of the country should get more than their due at this point of time from everyone. But in this complex piece, where would you see justice and equity?
So this is all something, I'll give it a pass right now. I'll refrain myself commenting on your question. But this is all something which is going to perhaps come before us at some point of time. And it's better to settle this in the court.
I thank
so
you.
we hope we are before your court, sir.
See, all courts are equally poised to deal with this situation. And I'm very confident the Indian judiciary is going to live it up.
I'm sure, sir.
I think Judge Saab, thank you for that. And also thank you for keeping some suspense for us to go to court. Otherwise, we'd know everything right here. It's been a wonderful session of learning, and I think some opening out of our hearts and thoughts and minds. I hope that everybody enjoyed it. I can't ask you all to speak up. If I unmute you all, there'll be nothing but noise, but you can raise your thumbs as I can see you all. And thank you for participating. I have to thank the chamber. If you have questions, please look at the email ID that was on the notice that you got and send in your questions. We'll try and reply to them. If you want the PowerPoint or any information or the recording, we'll upload the link. Dr. Jitendra, I hope we can upload the link, because that link even did. I hope most of you heard the judge and his keynote speech, because I, of course, did, because I was very lucky to hear it on a landline. The first time I've blessed MTNL, so it's been very good. Thank you all for participating, and we'll have one more similar session possibly next week, in which we will be discussing COVID-related effects on contract. Dr. Jitendra actually put it up for tomorrow, but it'll be sometime next week. We will send you a link, and we will be more prepared for this. I apologize to Justice Narula for the initial inconvenience. It is entirely not his fault that we weren't connected. We are now down to 377 people. So thank you all. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Mr. Amir. And the concluding note, I request everybody that kindly, if you can put your mail IDs in your chat, we'll be sending the recording of this entire BC session. And as a final remark, I request Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, our Senior Vice President of PhD Chamber, to kindly propose vote of thanks for the distinguished speakers.
I think it's been personally a very enlightening session for me. We have been honored with the presence and also with the wisdom shared by Justice Narula. I'm grateful to our other panelists, Mr. Pasrich, and we are, I guess, in very, very uncertain times right now, and the more we engage with each other and the more we bring clarity to every issues through discussions into our minds, and the more we are able to approach the judges like Justice Narula to have at least some idea or indication of the thinking. I think it's great, and we actually do look forward to the next session also. These are times in which we all need to engage much more hectically and much more regularly than in the normal times. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think we need to wait for another 2 minutes because people are putting their email IDs in the chat box, and once they are through, then we'll be, in fact, ending this session. Just 2 minutes.
Just one thing more, we'll be looking at employment issues in the next one. We have not discussed employment issues today. So one of the things that has come up is the effect of something called layoff, retrenchment, whether it can be done, what is the effect of force majeure on employment contracts, what is the effect of the government orders, the Epidemic Diseases Act, and the Disaster Management Act, the orders issued, and how binding are they on employers and employees is something we would like to discuss in the next session. So,
in fact, I was just discussing it today with some people, and all the acts that are supposed to cover this subject, none of them can force an employer to pay employees for times which have not been worked, but it's a different issue when the government says that you have to do it, otherwise I'm going to book you.
Yes, in fact, the employment issue is very, very vital. And as the employers, they are having a lot of liquidity crisis and crunch at this point in time. So we'll be having some of the distinguished experts who will be telling us about the nuances of that in this critical time, how they can surmount the challenge of payment of wages and salaries. And as PhD Chamber, we have.
But you see, Jasitharji, one moment, I would like to make a comment here. That you see across the world, from the major economies and sometimes even smaller economies, we are seeing that the government is shouldering the responsibility for payment of wages during lockdown time, which has not happened in our case, and which is going to be a big pain point both for the industry and probably might clog up the courts.
So, Switch, I will
so that is a concern.
And you can continue with this.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And I will also take leave. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Vijay, thank you very much indeed. In fact, you gave a very, very technical, point of view, and we look forward for having you in some of the important discussions in future also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you.